Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Janine McNair and this is Thursday the 5th of January 2023. First, the Ukraine update. Today is day 316 of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Orthodox Church in Russia, has called for a ceasefire and a Christmas truce in Ukraine. In a statement he posted to the church's website, Kirill said he appealed to all parties involved in the internecine conflict for the ceasefire, so that Orthodox people can attend services on Christmas Eve and the day of the Nativity of Christ. His call is being contrasted with Russia's refusal to respect any ceasefire on the 25th of December or New Year's Day. Ukraine's gross domestic product fell by 30.4% in 2022, the largest annual fall in over 30 years because of the war with Russia, Economy Minister Yulia Syridenko said this morning. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan told Vladimir Putin in a phone call that peace efforts in the Russia-Ukraine war should be supported by a unilateral ceasefire and a vision for a fair solution, the Turkish presidency said today. The first convicts recruited by the private military group Wagner have received their promised pardons after fighting for 6 months in Ukraine, Wagner founder Yevgeny Prigozhin told journalists today. French President Emmanuel Macron said France would send light AMX-10 RC armoured combat vehicles, an Elysee official said after a phone call between Macron and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky. US President Joe Biden said that the US was considering sending Bradley fighting vehicles to Ukraine. The armoured vehicle with a powerful gun has been used as a staple by the US Army to carry troops around battlefields since the mid-1980s. The US is also looking at ways to target Iranian drone production through sanctions and export controls, the White House has said. The Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister said significant Russian losses meant Moscow would probably have to announce a second partial mobilization in the first quarter of the year. Further strikes deep in Russian territory should be expected, the head of the Ukrainian military intelligence, Kyrylo Budanov, has told the US TV network ABC. UK government ministers have announced anti-strike legislation to enforce minimum service levels in 6 key public services, including the NHS and schools, as Rishi Sunak scrambles to get a grip on ongoing industrial disputes. The UK government plans to introduce a law in the coming weeks that would allow bosses in health, education, fire, ambulance, rail and nuclear commissioning to sue unions and sack employees if the minimum levels are not met. Minimum service levels will be set for fire, ambulance and rail services, with the government consulting on the adequate level of coverage for these sectors to address concerns that disruption to blue light services puts lives at risk. However, they will also reserve the power to impose minimum service levels in the other public services, although ministers expect to reach voluntary agreements in these areas and say they would only impose the anti-strike law if this was not possible. In a statement today, UK ministers invited union chiefs to hold talks on next year's pay review in an attempt to resolve current disputes constructively through dialogue. Even though Sunak has already rolled out pay demands for this year, despite millions of workers struggling with the cost of living. Responding to the UK government anti-trade union law plans, SNP Deputy Westminster leader Mary Black MP said, "These immoral proposals from the Tory government speak to the hard right rhetoric that has Westminster in a chokehold, and it's Scotland's key workers who are set to pay the price of Westminster control." She continued, "Just months ago, the UK government applauded key workers. Now they are threatening them with the sack if they go on strike. It's utterly shameful." The SNP condemns these plans in the strongest possible terms, which contrasts starkly with the constructive role the SNP Scottish Government has played in recent pay disputes north of the border. Scottish Green MSP Maggie Chapman said, "The attacks we're seeing on the rights of unions are not just an attack on workers and the right to organise, they're also an attack on terms and conditions and on everything that the trade union movement has achieved. These attacks must be resisted and defeated. We will always stand in full solidarity with workers when their rights are so brazenly threatened." Keir Starmer's speech moves Labour further right as he embraces Brexit and tighter spending. In a speech setting out his vision for a future Labour government, the Labour leader pledged a major push to devolve power away from Westminster as part of what he said would be an end to sticking plaster politics. In an attempt to capture the political centre ground and rid Labour of its reputation as the party of big government, Starmer said the answer to the problems plaguing the UK's public services was not to open the big government chequebook. Instead, he said, his party would stop power over those services being hoarded by a handful of people in Westminster. Referring to Brexit, Starmer said, "We will embrace the take back control message, but we'll turn it from a slogan into a solution from a catchphrase interchange." He said that the solution to problems such as long NHS waiting lists and delays at urgent care was not just to spend more money. "We won't be able to spend our way out of this mess, their mess. It's not as easy as that," he said. Starmer said he would back public-private partnerships to provide services, saying he was relaxed about the involvement of businesses. "That's what I'm proposing today, an active state working in partnership with private business," he added. Responding to Keir Starmer's speech, SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown said, "Today's intervention from Keir Starmer promised a decade of renewal, but the reality is another decade of crippling austerity for Scotland from Westminster." The leader of the official opposition doesn't only embrace the wrecking ball that is Brexit, he's now stealing their campaign slogans. Meanwhile, Brexit is hammering Scotland's economy in the midst of the deepest cost of living crisis in decades. Labour are now carbon copy Tories on Brexit, the co-conspirators to hush up the true cost of Brexit. Today's speech only confirms that the next general election is a choice between two Tory Prime Ministers, said Brown. Hospitals in several parts of England are discharging patients into care hotels in an effort to free up desperately needed beds to help them cope with the NHS winter crisis. NHS trusts providing acute care in Devon, Cornwall and Bristol and surrounding areas have begun moving patients who are medically fit to be discharged into hotels. The move is a revival of a practice used by the NHS in England during the pandemic, when hospitals sought to clear as many beds as possible for use by patients with COVID-19. NHS Devon has booked 40 rooms at the Leonardo Hotel in Plymouth, 10 of which are being used by the NHS Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Integrated Care Board to discharge patients, and the latter is also looking into arranging a similar setup itself. Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire Integrated Care Board has been using rooms at an unnamed hotel in the city since November to accommodate up to 30 patients. Some hospitals have used care hotels on and off since COVID hit in early 2020 to ease overcrowding and speed the release of beds occupied by people with no medical reason to still be an inpatient. They are mainly people with low medical need who doctors have decided are taking up a hospital bed unnecessarily and can be safely looked after elsewhere. After discharge, patients are then looked after in the hotel by staff from a private care agency employed by the NHS. They stay in the hotel, sometimes for weeks, until the local council and NHS have arranged a package of care to enable them to return to their home or care home. Caroline Abrahams, the director of charity Age UK, criticised the care hotels, saying that it underlines just how severe the crisis in social care has become, and that hotels are not an appropriate place to provide high-quality care for older people in need of support to recuperate after a spell in hospital. About 13,000 beds in hospitals in England, about 1 in 8 of the total stock, are occupied by delayed discharge patients. They end up stuck there, sometimes for months. The Guardian is reporting that the UK government has accused PPE MedPro of supplying defective gowns that could have compromised the safety of patients had they been used in the NHS. PPE MedPro, which has been linked to the Scottish Conservative peer Michelle Mone, was paid £122 million for 25 million sterile surgical gowns under a contract awarded in June 2020 by the Department of Health and Social Care, the DHSC, after Mone approached the UK government ministers offering to supply PPE. The DHSC has alleged that the gowns were rejected because they were not sterile. Their technical labelling was invalid and improper, and they cannot be used within the NHS for any purpose. The DHSC's allegations will add to the intense public and political pressure on Mone after her apparent involvement in PPE MedPro. After the Guardian reported in November that leaked bank documents indicated she and her 3 adult children secretly received £29 million, originating from the company's profits on the government PPE deals. Mone has previously denied via her lawyers that she had any involvement in the company, despite having first approached Michael Gove in May 2020, offering to supply PPE through My Team in Hong Kong, and The Guardian reporting last year, based on leaked files, that she did appear to have been secretly involved. Her lawyer has also said she did not declare PPE MedPro on her Lord's Register of Interests because She did not benefit financially and was not connected to PPE MedPro in any capacity. Moan was appointed to the House of Lords by David Cameron in 2015. The sterility of the surgical gowns PPE MedPro was contracted to supply is vital and governed by extensive technical laws and regulations. Because such gowns are used to protect patients from infection in critical medical settings, such as operating theatres. The DHSC's allegations that the gowns were not sterile are set out in court documents served on PPE MedPro as part of the government's legal action launched last month to recover its money. The DHSC is seeking a return of the full £122 million in public money and a further £11.6 million for storing and disposing of the gowns, plus interest, which has accumulated since then. The CEOs of the UK's biggest companies will have made more money in the first days of 2023 than the average UK worker will earn in the entire year, according to analysis of vast pay gaps amid strike action and the cost of living crisis. The High Pay Centre, a think tank that campaigns for fairer pay for workers, said that by 2 p.m. on the third working day of the year, today, an FTSE 100 chief executive will have been paid more on an hourly basis than a UK worker's annual salary, based on the median average remuneration figures for both groups. Paul Nowak, the General Secretary of the TUC, called on the government to intervene to bring back some fairness on pay, as many lower paid workers struggle with swinging real-term cuts to their income. According to analysis by the GMB trade union, it would take a 999 ambulance call handler almost 150 years to match the pay of the average chief executive. It's an utter disgrace, said Gary Smith, the General Secretary of the GMB, which represents ambulance workers who are set to go on strike next week. NHS workers and others are being forced onto the picket lines just to make ends meet, while these fat cats get the cream, he said. FTSE 100 chief executives are paid £3.4 million on average, which works out at 103 times the £33,000 average salary for full-time UK workers, according to the Office for National Statistics figures. The figures highlight how executive pay has increased dramatically after a dip during the pandemic, while ordinary workers are struggling to secure pay rises anywhere near inflation. Median FTSE 100 CEO pay is up 39% on January 2022, while the median workers' pay has increased by only 6% over the same period. This year, FTSE 100 bosses will pass the pay milestone 9 hours earlier than they did in 2022. The data suggested that CEOs would have to wait until the fourth working day of 2022 to overtake the median worker's annual salary, while this year they will accomplish the feat in under 3 days. Israeli government plans to limit judicial powers. Civil liberties and human rights advocates have expressed grave concerns about a plan by Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right Israeli government to limit the power of the judiciary, saying that it will encourage authoritarianism and put minority rights in imminent danger. If they succeed, it's a different system, a different Israel, said Dan Meridor, a former justice minister, stressing that in the absence of a constitution, the country's courts serve to protect people from being at the mercy of the governing majority. Under the plan, announced late on Wednesday by the current Justice Minister, Yariv Levin, Parliament would have the power to invalidate Supreme Court decisions with a majority vote of its 120 members. In effect, this would grant Netanyahu, who commands a 64-seat coalition, including ultra-Orthodox and anti-Arab legislators, an easy way of overriding the court and, critics warn, pushing through radical legislation. Liberal Jewish and Arab leaders have predicted that new laws could target minorities and the right to protest, while facilitating annexation in the occupied West Bank. The plan, which has yet to be written into law, also increases the influence of politicians and the government in selecting the court's members, and enables ministers to appoint advisors to the court instead of the civil service professionals who currently play that role and can thwart initiatives deemed problematic. Israelis opposed to the reforms fear for the country's democratic health, defending the court as a bulwark for minority rights. California Republican Representative Kevin McCarthy has begun the third day of voting and negotiations in his attempts to be elected as Speaker of the House. He needs 218 votes, a majority of the House, to secure the post, and although his party holds the majority since their victory in last year's midterm elections, McCarthy is being obstructed by up to 20 far-right Republicans who either don't want him as Speaker or want to wring enough concessions out of him that they have huge power as rank-and-file lawmakers. McCarthy has now failed to get a majority or even get closer to it in a total, so far, 6 rounds of voting. Right, 8 times. Okay, so some breaking news that I've just said 6 rounds of voting. This has now increased to 8 rounds of voting as I have been delivering this news story. The obstruction to McCarthy is being led by far-right Republicans from the group calling themselves the Freedom Caucus. Although they are ultra-Trump fans and staunch MAGA Republicans, they are ignoring the ex-president's call to support McCarthy for Speaker, a sign that Trump's hold over the Republican Party could be weakening. Without a Speaker, no other House business can commence, including the swearing in of its own members. Voting continues today with Kevin McCarthy trying again to negotiate support from his own rebels. So far, he has refused to back down. However, there is speculation that it might be time for him to step aside and allow someone else, such as right-winger Steve Scalise, to take his place as frontrunner for the speakership. Initiatives aimed at promoting the benefits of science, technology, engineering and mathematics, or STEM, among school pupils will receive funding to help develop Scotland's future workforce. National STEM programmes, Generation Science and the Young Engineers and Science Clubs will benefit from a total amount of £100,000. More than 100,000 pupils across Scotland have benefited from both initiatives until now. Further funding will be given to supporting science festivals, especially those taking place in Edinburgh, Glasgow, Stirling, and other towns around Scotland. The funding supports the Scottish Government's STEM education and training strategy, and the commitment to equip communities and young people, particularly those from remote and deprived areas, with STEM skills to tackle current and real-life challenges, including climate change and health-related issues. The Minister for Further Education, Higher Education, Youth Employment and Training, Jamie Hepburn, said, "We are working hard to ensure we maximise the number of people highly educated and skilled in STEM to adapt to the challenges of today and in the future. These initiatives can help inspire a generation of scientists, engineers, mathematicians and innovators, and develop the talent which will be required in our future workforce. This funding is a big step to helping make our vision for a greener and fairer Scotland a reality." An MSP is urging Scots to welcome 2023 by going for a New Year pint at their local blood donation centre. SNP MSP Emma Roddick will today visit her local blood donation centre in Inverness to begin 2023 by making a potentially life-saving donation. And she is encouraging people across Scotland who are fit and able to do so to book their appointment and help save a life. Across Scotland, there are almost 100,000 blood donors, but just over 31,000 additional donors have not given a donation in 2022. Ms. Roddick is looking to help see an increase in blood donations in 2023 and says, "The holiday period is a time where many of our lives slow down a bit. It's therefore a great opportunity to book an appointment." What better way to begin the new year than going for a pint? Donating a pint of blood is a safe, simple and significant step we can take this year to help save a life. Throughout the year, when we're trying to manage our busy schedules, it can be hard to find the time to get along to a blood donation centre or one of the many community sessions that are run across the country. But the holiday period is a time where many of us slow down a bit, and it is a great opportunity to give blood that you may be waiting to have done for some time. Channel 4 privatisation plans have formally been abandoned. Plans to privatise Channel 4 have been formally abandoned, ending years of threats to the broadcaster that have cost the government millions of pounds and were opposed by the vast majority of the media industry. The Culture Secretary, Michelle Donnellan, said Channel 4 was a British success story and a linchpin of our booming creative industries, and therefore it should not be sold. Instead, she is suggesting a relative modest series of tweaks to Channel 4's remit, with the business continuing to be owned by the state. Donnellan's decision reverses proposals set out at length by her predecessor Nadine Dorries under Boris Johnson's government, which would have seen Channel 4 sold to a private owner. There had been suggestions, including from Tory MPs, that the proposed sale was motivated by political opposition to Channel 4's output, rather than a sound business case. Scottish Government Culture Secretary Angus Robertson has welcomed confirmation that the reversal of the proposed plans to privatise Channel 4. Mr. Robertson said he will be writing to the UK Government to seek further details on how plans for the channel will impact public sector broadcasting in Scotland. Mr. Robertson said, The Scottish Government has long warned that plans to privatise Channel 4 were unnecessary and ill-conceived, and that if the UK Government ignored these warnings, privatisation of the channel would have a detrimental impact on public sector broadcasting and the jobs which rely on it. He continued, "I'm pleased that UK ministers have finally listened to repeated warnings and that they have confirmed plans to privatise Channel 4 are no longer being pursued. This is welcome news for the independent production sector, which has flourished with Channel 4's help, including £200 million for Scottish-based productions and support for 400 jobs since 2007. Well, that is it for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So, to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 per month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. Good night, and thank you for watching.